Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Joey from Lock Props. Today we are going to be showing you how I made Mjolnir from Thor Love and Thunder. Now, if you wanted to actually follow along with me, the free blueprints are down below, as well as affiliate links to all the tools and materials that I used to make this build. Without further ado, let's get started. I printed out the template I made in Inkscape. I have the links to the free blueprints down below. I have the cracked version and the normal one, so you can choose whichever one you want to build. Using my box cutter, I cut out all the pieces of the hammer and the hilt. I then took a 1-inch PVC pipe and cut out the length of the hammer. I marked where the hammer head meets the handle and then drew out where the top two handle trim pieces will go. I'll have my switch go in between them. I trace around where I think the button should go. Then on the bottom of the PVC pipe, I marked 2 lines on each side so I can cut a hole for the leather strap to go through. I brought out my handy dandy Dremel tool with this really fine bit and I cut out the sections I marked. Next, I need to make a leather piece going from the base of the hammerhead going all the way down to the hilt. I took a scrap of leather and wrapped around the PVC pipe, so I can get a general idea what length the leather has to be in order to try and have a clean seam. I squared off the edges of the leather and did a test fit. I have extra material, so that's perfect. We will cut down to what we need. I sanded down the PVC pipe so that way the barge cement can actually hold on to it. I coated the pipe and the leather with 2 coats each. Once semi-dry, I began placing the pipe onto the leather and rolled it in on itself. I got to the end where the pipe is being covered up and cut off the excess. I began pushing the leather, getting it up to the line with the other edge as best as I could. Now the handle was wrapped, but I need to cut out the holes for the button and the strap slots. I made a divot in the leather where the hole was and I used my X-Acto blade to cut out the square. Then I switched to the pommel side. This side was a little hard to cut from the outside, so I placed the blade into the pipe and began cutting from the inside out. I went slow, I just kept scoring the leather until I had my slot made. Now we can make the trim around the handle. We will cut out these bird-looking pieces and trace and cut out 10 of them onto 2mm EVA foam. Once I have cut one out, I do a test wrap and I have enough material to go around. To make it easier on myself, I just use the thickness of the Sharpie to follow the cutout and make the rest of them with that same consistency. I put them all on my Lazy Susan with some blue painter's tape and sprayed 3 layers of Plasti-Dip and 1 coat of Montana Chrome spray. Once dried, I put a dab of super glue on the trim where the V shape is and put the template on the side so then that way I knew where to place them. I flipped the pipe over and used more super glue to glue down the 2 wings of the trim to come together. I put some at the very end and lined up the seam and did this with the rest of the trim. Looks like it's come together. Next, I grabbed the pommel template. I cut it out and traced it onto more 2mm EVA foam. This piece will be the base for the pommel and we will just add layers on top of this piece. The extra 2mm foam I had, I used my ruler to cut out a very thin piece of foam and trace it around the edge of the pommel. I used super glue for this part. I then got some EVA foam clay and began sculpting the detail around the pommel. If it looks like a second grader did it, then you're good to go. I put 2 layers of barge cement on top of the leather and the back of the pommel detail, and once dried, put them together, making sure that I had the slots in the same place. Then I needed to add the leather strap at the end. I made a 1/2 inch strap and cut it down to about 16 inches. I overlapped the ends of the strap and punched the smallest hole from my hole punch. I laced the strap through the slot and brought both ends out from the bottom so I can secure them with a rivet. I grabbed a foam dowel for the cap and sanded one end down with the belt sander. Then I brought it over to the bandsaw, and with my fence, I just cut the end off. Plasti dipped and painted the end and superglued it into place. We now have to make the base of the handle. I got a 1-inch thick boy piece of foam and traced out the pipe. I put my bandsaw at 30 degrees and began cutting a 1/2 inch extra away from the line that I had made and went around the circle. If I didn't do that, it would make a cone and would not have enough material to do this. I grabbed a piece of copper pipe and removed the middle so I can sand it down to fit the PVC pipe. I plasti dipped and painted the part and did the test fit. Now onto the technical side. I bought a meter of the NeoPixel lights and wrapped it around the pipe. Once I got to a length that I liked, I cut the light strip, grabbed some wires, my soldering iron, a trinket, and a battery, and I put this circuit together. Now, I'm not a professional when it comes to soldering or electronics, but if you wanted to at least kind of get the gist of what I did with the soldering and the circuit board, I went ahead and put the link down in the description for Kamui Cosplay's video, because that's actually how I learned. But if you already know how to do that and you made all of that up to this point, but you wanted to know a little bit more about the coding, I actually did create the code myself, and I went ahead and put it down below for you as well, so then that way you can go ahead and just copy and paste it into whatever cosplay builds that you need and just change the color, and it does the same pulsating effect. Now we got the lights set up. We need to build the basic shape of the hammer. I cut out the inner rectangle piece and traced it out. This material is 4mm Plastazote. This is basically semi-transparent foam. We will need 4 of these rectangle pieces, so cut those out now if you're following along. I then take one of the pieces to be the bottom of the hammer. I traced out the original template with the pipe and I cut it out so I can mark on the foam where I need to cut it out for the circle. I put the wires of the Pro Trinket through the top and feed them through the hole I made for the switch. I soldered the switch to the cables and put it back into its spot. Whenever I did anything major with this build, I made sure to make a test. And it still works, thank God. I used super glue to stick the LED strip to the pipe. I only had to do a dot every other line. I next need to make the slanted corners of the hammer, so I took my template and traced out 4 of these rectangles and cut them with a 45-degree angle going inward. This is a separate piece, so be sure to look for that in the blueprints down below. After putting 2 layers of barge on each side, I placed them together, making sure that I line up the edge first, then slant inward. Next, I needed to make the 2 sides going up. Since we have made the bottom one already, I cut out 3 more pieces, 2 for the sides and 1 for the top. Rinse and repeat for the barge on both sides. Then I needed to make the top part. I need to accommodate the battery. So I cut out the top part where the rune is and cut a hole where the battery will slot into the foam and stay there. I took the extra 3rd rectangle and matched it up to the template and flipped it around and made the circle where I will be able to access the battery. I traced the battery, then cut that piece out. I added the side edges to the top piece and then glued it into place. The battery wasn't sticking in place, so I grabbed a 1/2-inch dowel and super glued it to the bottom of the battery so it can slide down the PVC pipe and stay in place. Next, we need to build the end caps of Mjolnir. I traced and cut out 8 pieces of the rune area with a 45-degree cut inward on all of them. Basically, every edge gets the inward cut except for the top, middle, and bottom sides of the hammer. The end cap corners come to these end pieces, and we will have to cut out 8 of them. Next, I cut out the template for the face of the hammer. We will only need to trace and cut out 2 of these with the inward cut. After the long process of barging all the pieces and their sides, I put them into place a piece at a time. I go slow in order to really line up the seams, and I won't have to sand off as much material. The top, I had to make sure I had to keep a part of the edge open until I was for sure done setting it in place. Rinse and repeat on the other side. Time for cleanup. I used the Dremel to sand down the very edges of the foam to smooth it out. Now for the outside of the hammer, I bought 4mm EVA foam and traced the template onto the foam and cut it out. Overall, we were basically making the same thing again, but with the normal EVA foam. But we get to add all the fun battle damage to this foam. So this bottom part has this recessed detail. I had to cut out the piece of the foam, which was about 3mm wide. I glued it back into place just a little recessed than before. For the top, bottom, and middle rectangles, be sure to cut on the outside edge of the Sharpie line. Since we are covering this whole piece with the same shapes, we will need to have this just be a tad bit bigger. The sides will have this detail we need to etch in. I cut this piece out of the template, marked it, scored it with a razor, and used the heat gun to open up that detail line. I now trace out the cracks and the battle damage I want in Mjolnir. If you're making this yourself, you can add as much or as little detail as you want, make it your own. I also need to make the rune on top. After tracing out where it's going to go, I tape the pattern on top of the foam so I can then use the X-Acto blade to score in the rune patterns. Once all done, I used the heat gun again to bring out all that detail, and I was really happy with the outcome. While I was working on the top, I had to cut out an area for me to have access to that battery and the wires just in case if I need to fix something. I cut out the rune shape on top of another piece. I got rid of the area where the battery is supposed to be and then put the Velcro on the inside of the circle and on the bottom of the rune top. I cut the circle out and glued it back into place just a little recessed so the Velcro wasn't too exposed and lifted the rune top too much, and then you could see the Velcro underneath. So let's just take a quick inventory of what we need for the outside of the hammer. We need to make the edges again, so I cut out another set of 4. Another 8 corner edges for the cap, and another 8 pieces of the runes, 2 sides, 1 top, 1 bottom, and 2 faces. Just gotta first add the recessed detail just to 2 of the edges that connect to the bottom piece. I put the edges of the bottom piece first since they have the correlating recessed detail. Then I make the end caps. I put off making the side runes for the longest time since I couldn't figure out how to do it, but I decided to make the caps first. Then I used my calipers to etch an equal line around the edges. Then I used my X-Acto blade to cut it out and glue it back into place just a little recessed. Then I started outlining more of the cracks, seeing if I can make them connect in one area to another, and added in more damage detail. Next was the really fun part. Using the razor blade, I followed the line of the cracks with a 45-degree angle, trying to be as messy with the cut as possible. Then when I got to the very end, I flipped it around and did the same thing on the other side, creating a valley into the foam, making it more space for the light to shine through the cracks. Then I used my wood burner to add in more damage, and also burn in the side detail runes. If you are going to do this, please be sure to use a respirator. Getting to add in all this detail was the most fun part of the build. Because when you get to do this, you get to allow the cuts to be organic, and even if you do make a mistake, it's just more battle damage. Next, I had to seal the foam, so I lined everything up and gave the good old 3 layers of plastic dip and 1 layer of Montana chrome. I got my chip brush and some acrylic paints. This is the Liquitex Heavy Body Mars Black, and I watered it down to make a wash. I smeared the paint all over the pieces and then tried to wipe them off as much as I could with a paper towel. Each time that you do this, you'll leave just a little bit behind, but it adds a lot of great detail in the damaged areas. Now, it's time to
assemble.
I start with the bottom and use super glue to keep everything tied down. I eventually ran out of super glue and started using barge cement, only in the areas that were covered by the foam, and this was a lot more helpful for the bigger sections of the hammer. This was like a big jigsaw piece. Trying to make everything fit together was so much fun. Once it was all pieced together, I prayed the light still worked, and it did. What a huge sigh of relief.
Whosoever builds this hammer, if they be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
Wow, so that was quite a bit of a build, but I'm really excited with how this turned out. But if you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh, I can't really follow along, I'm more of a beginner, that's okay, because I created a beginner-friendly project, which is Batman's foldable Batarang. And if you wanted to actually know how to do that, go ahead and click on this video right here. Go ahead. I'll wait.